Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. June is upon us. We are through the first 5 months of the year, and it's time for us to do another Cloud News of the Month, kind of highlights from what happened in May of 2024, as we've been doing here throughout the year. So very, very busy month in May. We cover a lot of things. We're joined by Brandon Whichard, who is a longtime friend of the show. For those of you that listen for a while, you know that Brandon jumps on all the time, helps us out both with, you know, what's going on in the industry. He's one of the co-hosts of Software Defined Talk, but he helps us because Aaron's on the road. Aaron's been in Europe for quite a while. He's doing quite a bit of work travel. So Brandon jumps in a very, very busy month here in May to cover a lot around cloud, a lot around cloud trends, but is also AI trends as well. So this show runs a little bit long, as we often do on Cloud News of the Month. So strap in, dig in. We're going to have a lot to cover. Really excited to have Brandon join us. We're going to get to that right after the break. Remember when ChatGPT launched? It felt like magic right out of the box. However, as we've now seen, an LLM might be brilliant technology, but it's not accurate by itself. For an enterprise-grade Gen AI app, you have to feed the LLM the reliable, current data. Then it can make connections and provide context. And for that, you need a database with the right capabilities. The team at Neo4j has been exploring how to get results by pairing LLMs with knowledge graphs and vector search. Check out their podcast episode about LLMs and knowledge graphs throughout 2023 at graphstuff.fm. They share tips on retrieval methods, prompt engineering, and much more. Don't miss it. You'll also find the link in the show notes. That's graphstuff.fm. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely. And if you're watching this on video, you may say, hey, that does not look like the normal bearded guy. We are joined today by a longtime friend of the show. If you've listened for a long time, you know our friend Brandon Whichard from Software Defined Talk. Brandon, it is Cloud News of the Month for May of 2024. How are you, man? How you been?
Doing fantastic. I think I appreciate you having me on. And it's been a great month of news. So I feel like just lots has happened. So it's Aaron's travel is my gain. That's the way I'm thinking. But I do no beard, so I have plenty of hot takes, but no beard. So I can stand in that way. Yeah.
Well, I figured the last couple of months have been fine. They've been not super busy, but they've been fine. I knew you were good for three reasons. One, as you mentioned, Aaron's traveling. He's over in Europe basically this whole month. It's a busy month. You have no problem covering lots of different topics. You cover a ton on Software Defined Talk as we've done. My other question before we dive into all this stuff, lots of announcements on my social feed. It's 100 days until football season starts. So as our favorite tech/sports crossover guy, how do you celebrate 100 days until football starting?
What did I do? I renewed my NFL ticket subscription on YouTube. They immediately sent out the early bird subscription, and I immediately did that. And then, as I found, it's sort of like I almost have to stop listening to a lot of the preseason stuff because I'm already revved up. I'm ready to go. I'm going to burn myself out. So I almost have to cut back. It's like I can't hear any more news, no more prognostications. But I have started, the fantasy, the leagues, the chat are starting to come up, a little talk about the draft time when we're going to get it done. So yeah, this is, to me, come August, I'll be ready to go. Be ready to go for college football, NFL, fantasy, and maybe once and for all, we'll just spin off and just do a full blown football show. That's what I'm sure what these listeners want to hear.
There you go. Yeah, we one of these days we'll do that. It's not as if. Yeah, there really is. There are almost no football shows out there. So we probably could fill a void that doesn't exist today.
Right. How niche could we possibly go to find something new that's not being covered?
Exactly. Well, listen, as folks know, we've been doing Cloud News of the Month now. We, instead of doing Cloud News of the Week and kind of at the beginning of every show, we're kind of lumping things together. May has been a very, very busy month, both for cloud and for AI, which is sort of what this podcast has evolved into. From our list of good old fashioned cloud news, what jumped out at you from last month? There was a lot that went on the cloud side of things.
Well, I think we got to start on the cloud side. I mean, we have to start with the AWS new CEO, I guess Matt Garman, right, taking over, and Slepsky kind of stepping down. And I think one of your weekend conversations, I think, you did a great kind of summary of sort of like leadership and leadership transitions. But one of the things you said in there I thought was so true was it was true and false in a way. It was something like along the lines of like, AWS has like released nothing in the last like 2 years or whatever, or something like that. And obviously I'm misquoting a little bit there, but I think, and I know one of the things in the list here is like AWS grows to 100 billion, but I think that's sort of like, it's kind of newsworthy in the sense of like, yeah, the cloud has just become the stable kind of boring thing, right? And we think of that 100 billion, it's really compute, storage, networking, and databases, right? Like that's what I think, like, the vast majority of that revenue is. And it's remarkable, and I'm sure we're going to talk about AI because everyone's required to talk about AI here in a few minutes. But the thing that I think is interesting is just how predictable cloud across all of them. AWS. We had the Google conference recently. We had the Microsoft conference, and it's like every single one of them, CEOs gets up, they give you the cloud stack, they tell you about a new data centers, new infrastructure, a new chip they're building. They give you a whole bunch of features, right? Which are super important, right? They're like super important, go into all the consoles. And they're all really well, they're important and they all work well and they're super boring, right? It's just like, we're just like, that's what we expected. More storage, more databases, another chip. And it's just become, this $200 billion industry, at least amongst the top three, has really started to take a back seat. So we think 10 years has gone by. Like a lot has happened, but we're now officially in the part of the cloud era that I think is probably pretty boring and maybe bad for Adam Selipsky. He's probably was like, we're killing it. I'm selling a lot of storage, networking, and compute. Like, what else do you want from me? Like, well, we want more, and you're out, and we're going to bring in Matt Garman. So I don't know. I guess be careful what you wish for. I guess as a CEO, it's like you can be very successful, but not successful in the right way, and then suddenly, you find yourself looking for a new job.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that wasn't clear is he looking for a new job? Does he get to stay on the AWS payroll? Is he? I mean, I can't imagine. If you were the CEO, you're going to stick around, right? Like you wouldn't, I guess he could go somewhere else in Amazon, but I can't imagine he's sticking around. It would be interesting. Like they have these things on the internet where if you wanted to, for example, like write a song, like write a country song, you can just put in 5 or 6 things and it'll write a song for you. Like I do wonder if, maybe that's something that we should jointly do is create a tool that will allow you to just go, hey, build a cloud keynote for one of the 3-4 major cloud providers. And it'll just spit it out. It's like exactly like you said, here's the stack, here's the new locations, here's the new set of compute that follows whatever the Intel roadmap is. And, here's a couple of moonshot things that everybody won't remember because they're walking out of the keynote for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that is sort of like, if I was to say anything, it's sort of like the news. It's not really news. It's just the plateau of productivity. I think as Gardner would say, it's sort of like, we can just predict, right? It's just going to get better and better. The growth rates are somewhere probably on the low end between 15%, the high end between 25%, roughly $150 to $200 billion amongst the top 3 cloud providers. Fantastic business, very predictable, very boring though, right? And it's just like, to everyone that doesn't follow this all like as closely as we do, it's like, that's just what we expected. So I think it's just kind of interesting in general. And, obviously, who knows what Selipsky will do. Obviously he's got generational wealth. So I know you and I, we've talked offline, like we would both be retired, but like I'm sure that's right. Down the road, I'm sure that probably wasn't the exit he wanted. So I'm sure he'll reemerge at either like an upcoming startup or, some gigantic company. And that'll be fun for us to talk about when it happens.
That's right. Well, so those are the headlines that Brandon is claiming. Cloud is now primed to be taken over by private equity. It's boring, stable cash. Tom Bravo probably going to be buying AWS sooner than later, and spin out to an AI cloud. Now, the flip side of that was our friend Jamin Bell from Cloud of Judgment said that cloud revenues from all of his sort of channel checks are starting to look better. So, the kind of the takeaway from his most recent article and based on, recent, him checking in on why people, customers are buying and so forth is he feels like the budgets around cloud and sort of IT in general are sort of perking up. So that's a nice thing from, the year feeling like it was going to be very, very flat. So it'll be interesting to see if that sort of pans out. But, at least from a, accelerating things in the IT space outside of AI, it feels like that's a good thing.
No, definitely. Jamin's newsletter definitely a must read, but it's also, again, he just sort of like, I think at the low end, it's like I'm looking at his latest. It's like AWS was run rate was 17%, and and the high end here, I guess, is like Azure 31%. But it's like it's such a narrow range. It's like okay, fine, it's okay. Cloud's growing at 19% or 23%. It's just like I mean, these businesses are awesome. Like if I gave you this business, I was like, hey, could you run it? And you're like, oh my gosh, we're down to 19%. What are we going to do? So it's just, when I look at all this stuff, I'm like, it's kind of just like, yeah, cloud is doing fine. Now, is it the old, in the fullness of time, everything will be in the cloud, going back in time? Probably not. That probably isn't. That day is over, right? The day it's going to grow 50% forever and every conceivable piece of compute infrastructure will be in the cloud. Andy Jassy, as much as we love him, right? That is not going to be the case. But now flipping that around and be like, is like a third or 50% going to be in the cloud? Like probably. And it still has a ton of way to go. And Jamin does a good job kind of covering this. Like growth rates are fine. Cloud business are fine. Everything's good. But again, like I understand, like it's boring. It's boring to we've got all this AI drama. It's like, who wants to hear about everything's just going fine over here in cloud. So that's why I think we hear less about it these days.
Right. Well, and the other thing, the flip side of it was there was a good kind of article and a set of charts that had come out. Being a VC over the last couple of years, investing in unicorns at sort of the top of the market during COVID has not paid off very well. So I think unfortunately, we're going to probably start to see a lot of VC investments, sort of the unicorns of 2021, 2022. We're going to see a lot of either exits, endings, all sorts of, spin outs, acqui-hires. I think that's probably going to be the sort of, obituary that we're going to get from the, the non-big cloud providers from the COVID era. Are you seeing it any different? Are you seeing any, the weird thing to me is this last couple of weeks, we did see a bunch of companies take like a D and E round of funding, which I didn't think was going to happen, given where interest rates are and where, some of these companies are. But it feels like in general, the unicorns of 2021 and so forth aren't necessarily, we're not going to see a whole lot of Hall of Famers from that group.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, there was a great, I can't remember where the link is, but there was a great thing sort of about the pandemic stocks, the kind of the ones that were like such, Zoom is like the best example. And there's like 4 or 5 others, I think Discord or a few others on there. And it was just like, you just see these gigantic spikes and then you see them come back down to the kind of basically, what their pre-pandemic valuation is. And I think that's just what's happening here with the venture capitals. Like, yeah, any venture capital, like who remembers Clubhouse? Like who remembers some of like all the stuff that like went on? It's like, it just has to work its way through the system. It's sort of like, it'll be really bad for the companies that, obviously if you're working at one of those companies, you have to take a massive down round, or, maybe you sell at a fraction of what you were once worth, but it's kind of like, that's the game, right? So I don't think we should, and of course these same venture capitalists who had a bad 22, 23 are, spending money on these AI companies literally as fast as they can. So I think, everyone has moved on very quickly. So it's like, it'll be bad. I feel bad for the people of those companies, but it's sort of in the inevitable process of resetting the market.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we're going to be talking about probably in next month's Cloud News of the Month, and we may bring you back for that because it might be big enough. We saw some more kind of announcements out of the Broadcom world, out of the Broadcom VMware world. They have now sort of broken up with AWS, if you will, right? They're no longer allowing AWS to sell the VMware cloud. Broadcom earnings come out. I looked it up this morning. They come out in June. So that will have then been sort of 2 full quarters of Broadcom owning VMware. What are you sort of seeing, hearing, speculating in the market about kind of how the market's adjusting to the new VMware?
Well, this to me, I think on our side and in the cloud world, I mean, this is by far the biggest news. It's probably the biggest news in a long time that I don't know if it's being overlooked, but it's just shocking. I think obviously Broadcom buying VMware, not a surprise. We saw that, that happened, announced 1.5 years, 2 years ago. So not a big deal.
Right.
I think we all expected them to raise prices, do some kind of streamlining. That wasn't a surprise, but like the price increases. And I honestly, I look at this like day to day. I try to talk to people about like what's real. I mean, I've heard 10x, right? I've heard some of these numbers are shocking to the point of like, I don't believe people are lying to me, but I'm also just like, I don't see how that can be true. So you've got that going on. And then this AWS thing, like I have probably, rarely am I surprised in enterprise software, but this is shocking to me, right? Because it's sort of like for so long, the dream of every company is to get into with AWS, right? We just kind of went over, they're $100 billion company. They're growing. This is the future of the cloud. They're leading the way. And for Broadcom to just, basically say, thanks, no thanks. Well, you have to buy it from us. I mean, I was shocked. And then they wrote a blog post, Broadcom wrote a blog post that said something. I mean, basically said, this is not a big deal. You can still, but I was like, no, I think this is a huge deal. I mean, this is a massive deal, kind of turning your back on AWS and saying that, it's just kind of treating them as like just another co-location, as if you and I would open up like a little co-location shop and be like, no, we're not going to deal with you anymore. And we're going to break off this relationship. So to me, shocking. I mean, I'm still in disbelief. And I guess, what I'm spending a lot of time is like, everyone is talking about alternatives to VMware now. Like that is for sure a conversation. I don't need to tell you that, right? You know all about OpenShift and, Nutanix, and the list goes on and on. Like I've had more conversations about like, what are the alternatives to VMware in the past, like whatever, few weeks, months, and I've had my entire career. So I am still shocked about what's going on. And I really don't know what's going to happen, but I will say, there's two ways to look at it. Either VMware sort of just, or Broadcom just sort of like maybe did, miscalculated, or the part I kind of come down on is like, at the end of the day, they're just being good business people, but maybe it's not so fun for the customers. It's like, at the end of the day, they look at the spreadsheet. They're like, our most profitable customers are this top, whatever, 20% or whatever it is. Right. And we're going to raise prices on them. We're going to cut costs. They're going to pay us, and we don't want to deal with all this other stuff. Because VMware, as a company, was always very channel friendly, partner friendly. They kind of serviced everyone, kind of like one big family, worked with AWS, worked a lot of the other cloud providers. And I think maybe that was the Broadcom calculation, was just like, no, you're too nice. We're cutting off these people. We don't care about them anymore. We're going to raise prices on the top, and we're going to make more money. This is how we're going to make back I think it's like $69 billion they spent. So maybe it's good business. I don't know. I mean, it's just hard to go through. And you go to all these conferences now. I think the number one hallway track, and I know you were at, obviously you were at the Red Hat conference and others, is like some of the top tracks. I mean, forget about AI. Like everyone talks about that, but I think the real thing people want to say is, here's what I'm doing to move off VMware. Like if you give that kind of presentation, people want to hear. They are paying attention. So I'm going to be fascinated. You mentioned the earnings. We'll have to see if it's working out for them. I'm tentative. I guess I've not really made any strong position, but I'm still kind of shocked by it all.
Yeah. I have sort of two questions. One question, and maybe like an observation or a suggestion. So do you think, we've heard all the stories. So like if it was Brian and Brandon's, value added service out of Austin, Texas, like we would have just gotten an email, just like, like you get these like, oh, our terms of services change and blah, blah. Do you think AWS just got an email from Broadcom saying like, hey, thanks for the thing, but we're not doing this anymore? Or do you think they had like a legit meeting where they were like, kind of pounded their fist and said, sorry, this is all over? Like how well,
for sure. I mean, there was
especially because Gelsinger went on stage with Andy Jassy, and it was like a big deal that all this stuff sort of happened.
Oh, no, totally. I think there was certainly in a meeting. Now, I think the question is like, how far up did the meeting go? Like, obviously the partner managers met.
Right.
And the question is like, did it go all the way up to Sletsky, or did it even get to Andy Jack? Like, where were the levels of like, hey, let's really put the people in the room and really make sure we, let's think this through. Well, it's almost like before we make any final decisions, let's think this through. So, but I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard, I guess the only thing I've heard is just the people at AWS, more the rank and file. They were surprised as well. So I don't think it was, in this case, I think it's pretty clear. Broadcom just came in and said, we want to change the terms. And I don't think my impression is, if I was to speculate, I would just say it seems like they just told AWS, this isn't what we're going to do. And I think because they had the year and a half to prepare, they clearly looked at the spreadsheet and they clearly did some kind of calculation. Like, for whatever reason, they just decided like, we want to own the billing relationship. We don't want our customers buying this from AWS. Potentially that's a good business strategy. Like, you don't want to seed, if you will, like your customers. We don't want them to kind of slowly sneak out of VMware onto AWS. Right. But they had clearly made up their mind. Now,
right.
It feels like I don't know. It feels like one of these decisions, it's not going to be easy to undo. So, and again, it throws open the doors. Now everybody's going to look at other alternatives. And I should have mentioned just moving to the cloud, moving off VMware and moving to AWS's virtual infrastructure is another option. So really interesting to see what happens going forward.
The other question I'm trying to figure out is, so if you're in the Broadcom, I don't know if it's biz dev or it's PR or whatever it is, right? I feel like every announcement they've made at some point within like a month or 2 weeks later or whatever it is, there's some article, it's a CRN article or it's either on the Cube or wherever it is, and it's somebody from Broadcom going, no, 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 don't look at us in a bad light. Oh, we apologize that the wording was wrong. Like, couldn't they just start taking the approach of going like, hey, we're going to leak this to a few, kind of friendly media outlets and go like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Could you put this out on a Friday? Let it float around on the Reddit channels a little bit. And then by Monday, we can all kind of come back and go like, oh, okay, that blew up in our face. Let's just pretend that leak never happened. Like, they don't seem to have any of that discipline whatsoever. It'd be one thing if they were just like, yeah, we did it. Tough, live with it. But then they keep apologizing. And I don't understand that either the apologizing for it or the, oh, you guys don't understand this. Like, it's not you, it's me. You don't understand this. Like, what? Why are they doing this? Why don't they just, like, it's like they've never done announcements before. Maybe they haven't because they're in the chip business and they're, everything is OEMs but God, they don't seem to understand. It depends, I guess,
how long you followed Broadcom. Because I mean, obviously they bought CA and they bought Symantec and others, and it's like those aren't as big companies. And like this is kind of follows
companies that nobody loved. So yeah, maybe that's what it is.
True. I mean, that's
anybody to care.
I think that's probably a good way to say there was companies with like low customer satisfaction, but they kind of did a lot of this as well. Like to a lot of the CA and Symantec customers, they kind of said, hey, this is changing. We're doing this now. And they kind of took stuff away and ended partnerships. But I don't think it was nearly, to your point, like it just was like, VMware is sort of like one of the probably handful of companies is like a backbone of all of, enterprise IT. So,
right.
So I think part of it is probably them like kind of getting a sense of like, wait, we bought something different. And like maybe people like do love VMware in a way they never loved CA or Symantec, which is definitely true. But I also think it's some of these apologies are sort of like, sometimes you see these celebrity apologies that start with something like, I'm sorry if I offended you. Like it's kind of one of those things. It's like, yeah, sorry, I mean, I'll say offended. Something. If you make me like say something, I'll give you some kind of backhanded apology. But I kind of feel like that's going on here at Broadcom. It's like, the PR people are probably like, we got to put something out, and they put out kind of this like, I'm sorry you're offended. But I think the people pulling the trigger are like, no, this is like,
I'm not
they're looking at the spreadsheet, and you already said like, if they come out and earnings are great, and they say something like, we've taken out X amount of cost out of the VMware acquisition, and we've actually seen a higher renewal rate in our top platinum customers, resulting in more revenue. You know what Wall Street's going to do? The stock's going to go up, and they're going to be like, "That's a great leader." They're going to say something like that. They're bringing financial discipline to VMware. So I think that's kind of the audience they ultimately care about.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be interesting because I think the VMware event is in like August or something like that. It would be interesting if like during the analyst, track or whatever, they just were like, okay, we're going to break out the spreadsheet. We're going to have our guy walk you guys through the spreadsheet. We're going to show you like, hey, we're going to change this cell. It's going to affect 700 other cells downstream, but it's going to work. And then all the analysts were just like, oh, wow. Yeah, no, it's work. It's totally going to work. It's
totally, you got it. You figured it out. And again, it's
not
like
a hunch. It's all spreadsheet work.
Yeah, and it's one of those things like could be good business, could be more earnings.
Right.
Still That's bad right. for customers though, right? Like if you are putting together your budget for this year and you have a VMware line item and it's gone up, forget about like 10x, that seems crazy. But even if it goes up 40%, right? That's a huge, you're like, you got to figure something out. So bad for that group of people. But, at the end of the day, they just, this is like Oracle's been doing this forever, right? I mean, this feels like this, like most of Oracle's like just raising prices at this point. So it's not unheard of, and like, I don't think Larry Ellison, when he's on his like private island somewhere in the Pacific coast, I don't think he thinks of one moment is he like, man, we were really mean about that. I think he's just like, this is the way you do it. This is business.
That's right. All right. Before we jump into the AI stuff, we're going to have a new session that anytime you come on, we're going to cover this. The famous DHH of 37 Signals had a couple new proclamations this month. In the past 6 months, he's bemoaned public cloud for private cloud. He has bemoaned, was it Kubernetes in general? He built his own scheduling system.
Yeah, they built their own stuff, right?
And now he has dismissed microservices as entirely a ZERP phenomenon. And apparently they're abandoning Macs at 37 Signals. He is bringing Linux to the desktop. So he is the great antithesis of all things in the tech industry. What say you about his latest proclamations?
I don't know. I just think at the end of the day, DHH just jumped the shark. At some point you're just like, I don't know what to say, like a super successful Ruby on Rails, much respect to all that stuff. 37 Signals, they've done a lot of good stuff, but I think this is just the classic, time versus money. It's like, I mean, the Linux desktop is the funniest one. It's like, I mean, anyone that's ever attempted it, that just means you're going to spend hours and hours trying to figure out display drivers. That's all that means, right? It's just You're not going to get it to work out. And it's like, and it's weird, right? To me that like, he's just become so extreme. He almost has like, I don't know, I hesitate to even say it, but sort of like almost like a philosophical political agenda amongst a lot of stuff, right? I think there's just a lot of pent up, like, I think he's just like, we're just watching him work through a lot of issues in technology ways. I think it's just sort of like, because he's always be like, people don't want to work. And, this was like, I think he even referred to like microservices as like make work, like a public institution. I'm like, I'm just like, hey man, we're all out here. I'm just gonna speak for everyone at the moment. It's like, everyone is trying to figure out how to keep these systems up, running faster, and add features to them. I'm not saying microservices is perfect, but it is an attempt to do that. And there are very good examples of large companies, that we will not belabor on this podcast. There are like only 5,000 other podcasts where it's been discussed, right? About how they help. And so I can see like maybe for him, maybe in his one world small application, his email application, it's not a good use. It's like, that's fine. But to then extrapolate that to the entire industry and the whole thing too, like they bought a couple Dell servers and like, we're running everything there. It's like, great, that'll probably work for you. I can name only like 8 million companies that couldn't do that. And so I just think he's just gotten in his head a little bit too much, like around like, hey, what works for him? And of course, like the funniest thing at the end of the day is, because his main service they're working now is like, hey, email. And my answer to all of this is like, what you could actually do? You could just use Gmail. You know what I mean? And not have any infrastructure cost at all. And like, just use that. It would just be for free. Or like, and I think the post I want someone to write is when he finally just gets to the point of like, guys, we're down to like, we have no infrastructure cost. We have nothing. We recommend everyone just write letters and then put a stamp on them and just send them around. It's just unbelievably efficient. The time, you really think through the letters. You don't have any technology outages, and just do that because he's just gone to me off the deep end.
Yeah, you're right. I was as I was thinking about this because he also wants to get rid of CI/CD, and I was like, okay, what's the over under on when he gives up on Ethernet? And he's like, okay, we're going back to Token Ring or something. But I think you're right. I think he's like getting rid of Ethernet is too small of a step. I think we're getting rid of computers. We're going offline.
I mean, that's all that's left, right?
We're not going to be the metaverse. We're not going to be the internet. Everything is right. We're going to go, and we're not going to put ink in our pens. We're going to dip the ink. We're going to get the pens that you have to dip it in your own ink and then write the letters. And I like that that's where he might go. I like the prospect of thinking about like how insane he must be. What issues he is working through that he feels like he needs to bring that up.
Well, another thing I just come back to is like, why didn't he ever just like vlog about like the hey email service? Like, tell me, I just kind of always make fun of it. It's like, okay, like what have you added? Like, why is it so good? Like, what should you doing? Because like when you go on there, and I think sometimes people like one of the complaints about the hey email service is the search, and people are like, oh, it's not as good as Gmail, and they'll be like, oh, well, you can't expect this to be as good as Gmail. Like Google's been doing this forever, and it's like, oh, I don't think that's a good answer. Like I think the answer is like you need to be as good, right? So I don't know, strange.
I only want to see two more tweets from him like forever. One is either we're pulling the plug on everything, like we're just like you said, we're going paper, or it's just it's that meme of the guy from Breaking Bad where he just lays down on the pile of money, but it's just his head on top of like, whatever character it is. And he's like, and we made so much money. And then everybody's like, oh, okay, cool. They figured it out. I only want to see those two tweets from him going forward.
I look forward to that.
All right. On to the chaos and the madness. What of all the things? So OpenAI had a big event. Microsoft had a big event. Google had a big event. Amazon fired their CEO apparently because of AI. Which of the AI news stories kind of grabbed your attention this last month?
Well, there's a lot of good ones. I think, I think just the OpenAI, because I think one of the last times I was on this show, right, we were covering around Thanksgiving. It was about, the fall, I guess, of Sam Altman, and then the return, right? But I think again, like I think I've said something like, "Hey, this is going to be like a trilogy," and I think we're definitely into part 2, sequel to it. So, I actually did really enjoy the OpenAI. I think it was like a 20-minute presentation. They showed some really cool stuff with GPT-4o, as we've learned, the name of it. So definitely go watch that. Thought it was interesting he wasn't on that. But then, of course, followed almost immediately by this is back to your PR questions about like Ilya and one of the safety people immediately resigning. This like they had this great announcement, then they finally got rid of them, and it was like, okay, like that wasn't a huge surprise. Probably could have orchestrated that either so it happened like 2 or 3 weeks before or after the announcement. So I thought that was kind of odd. Followed immediately by the like, we didn't copy Scarlett Johansson's voice, but we did copy Scarlett Johansson's voice. So I think like we've seen a lot of this. Like I feel like this is something we've seen a lot of the startup CEO just flame out in a fantastic way. Obviously, I don't know if anyone can beat SBF. I mean, he went from billionaire to jail like in record time. But I think we have the Travis Kalanick, of Uber fame. I feel like this is where Sam is. He's clearly on this watch, right? Where it's sort of like, how long before there is going to be an attempt to oust him that is successful? And I think the thing I'm watching is obviously, Microsoft, because that was on the heels of Build, right? It was the whole Scarlett Johansson mess.
Right.
These companies, the last thing Satya Nadella wants on is any type of PR problem like this. And behind the scenes, he's just got to be pissed, right? You're like, You're messing up our announcements. You're making like, I don't even know what they gained from using the voice. It was just like, whatever. They have 3 voices in there already. Just leave that one out. It was not a big deal. No reason to do that risk. And then of course, I think it's next month, Apple is rumored to partner up with ChatGPT, and there's probably no company other than Microsoft that doesn't want distractions. So I think we're just watching, if you will, this meteor like race towards some type of collision where finally, because everyone has a boss, it doesn't matter who you are, everyone has a boss, and if you get Apple and Microsoft, trillion-dollar companies that do not want to have these kind of distractions, that will probably be the ouster of Sam Altman. So that's just fun for me to watch more than anything. I think ChatGPT is succeeding in spite of all of this craziness. I don't even know. You can tell me anything about OpenAI, and I'd probably believe it. So I think they do have a really good model. But I think the whole idea is these big companies get in place. The thing I'm really interested in is just sort of like, how sustainable is it? And also, too, are some of the cracks, because when you see Sam Altman interviewed, he's very calm. He's super nice, very almost just very mild manner. But behind the scenes, I think he's got to feel some like tremendous pressure, right? Because I think doing a lot of these things and making a lot of these mistakes and trying to, if you will, continue to kind of keep the circus going, right? Because it's sort of like, because the big companies are all building similar models. It's getting bigger and bigger. So I'm really interested to see if they can stay ahead of the curve. And more importantly, what ultimately happens with the leadership. So I don't know. What do you think?
Right. Oh, God, I have so many questions about the whole thing. It's like, all right, question number 1, did they put together the 4 Omega like event like a week before that? Because it's like, it wasn't that nobody showed up for it. It was like, 50 or 60 OpenAI people. I'm yet to find anybody who has got the full sort of 4 Omega capabilities yet, because like the first thing I would have thought would have happened with the internet is they would have gone, let me try and recreate those exact same prompts and see if I get the same answers back. And I've seen nobody yet, whether it's on TikTok or YouTube or anywhere, do the whole like, hey, let me get my friend who speaks Spanish and let me get me who speaks English and let me, have it do math with me. Like, that seems like something you could replicate to figure out whether any of those demos were legit or not. Like that I'm really curious about. I'm really curious if they purposely made the responsiveness as horny as the internet said that they think it is. Because like that was mentioned so many times about how it was like, ooh, Steve, you look great for your interview. Like, did you get a haircut? Like, is that the default thing? Or like, is it sort of the Mark Zuckerberg thing of like the reason we created Facebook was to like meet girls? So the reason that we created ChatGPT was for like these guys to be able to have somebody to talk to. I have all kinds of questions about that event. And then I still have 10,000 questions about like, how is OpenAI being run? Because it's like Sam Altman is acting like somebody who has more money than God. Like you said, he doesn't seem like he seems stressed out about stuff. But as best we can tell, like he's not in the billionaire club. He still allegedly, as far as we know, doesn't own a whole lot of equity, but yet he's the CEO, and somehow the board allows him to keep making these decisions without any major equity. We don't really know what happened with the whole board thing. There's apparently this super nebulous language, and I'll put a link in the show notes that says like, yes, we have partners, but at some point, if the board just randomly decides tomorrow that like where we are is AGI, then everything is back to being under our intellectual property.
Right,
And
it like defaults back. Yep.
Like there's all kinds of stuff in there, not to mention they're now giving away even more, GPT stuff for free, which means that like they're burning through money. But it's like, well, whose money are they burning through? Are they burning through like Microsoft money? Are they burning through this like Saudi wealth fund money? Are they burning through like Apple money that we haven't heard announced yet? Like, how are they? Like, I just have a million questions about what's going on with this company. And it is the weirdest thing of like, the world has this perspective of like, yeah, we're going to base the future of, maybe computing, but also maybe mankind on this company that like people literally are like, this could just be a backstory of one of the Batman villain movies, as far as we like. That's how much transparency we have about what's going on. Like, he may live in a castle that has like a skull on the outside. Like, we don't know. We have no idea what's going on. And you're just like, and like you said, like Satya Nadella has to wake up every day going like, it's like having a fucking teenage kid. Like, what did he screw up today? Like, what am I having to deal with? And oh, by the way, I'm running this $3 trillion company and I'm betting the farm on it. And I don't know what, like, he doesn't seem to want to like listen to, like, I don't know that we're really all that close. And yeah.
Well, I think that's exactly what we're going to see in the next year, right? Is that like, I think for sure, and I don't know, the whole Apple thing is still speculation. So we'll have to see who Apple partners up with. But I think for sure the dependency on OpenAI, one, these companies are going to go build their own models, because I think it's pretty well known now, right? Like how to do it. It's just, can you throw a bunch of compute at it? And I think, and this is where I think why Sam probably has like, what he worries about at night is like, hey, what if they figure out they don't need me? Like this entire, like this company could go from $100 billion to zero, like overnight. Right. And so I think that's why they're kind of always racing out announcements, trying to show their state ahead. And I think you're right. Cause I actually really liked the demo because it was real short. It was like 20 minutes and it showed some cool stuff. And, but you're exactly right. It's like, I don't have the paid one, but I could download the thing and like, I can't do any of that. I mean, you have like the app, right? You can still like, but you can't do any of the stuff that, at least I haven't been able to do that. So that part, like people are really criticizing Google because they did their thing afterwards and like, oh, there's a lot of vaporware. And it's like, well, I don't know. The OpenAI stuff seems a little bit like vapor too. Right. So, but people don't write about it. So I think in the next year, what we're going to see is that like, hey, if Apple gets in bed with them, there's going to be, for sure, they're going to want a much tighter control on the messaging here. And then also too, simultaneously, it's like all these startups, like you always have to be careful when big companies talking to you. Do they just walk in, learn your secrets and, never and walk away? Or do they ultimately, actually want to pay you? And I think right now if it's just GPUs and doing this training model, I think Apple and Microsoft are probably like, well, we'll be friends as long as we have to be, but there's going to be a point where it's like, we're going to go our own way. And I think they, Sam Altman has to know that too. So that's going to be, the fun thing to kind of watch going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. It's, I think of all the companies that did the big announcements, I think, they're the one that I think got people the most excited and also left the most questions. I feel like the stuff that Microsoft and Google announced are kind of what you would expect them to do, which is like, hey, we put AI all over our portfolio and we've got some, cool new stuff. So, Google talked about, well, Gemini has this gigantic window of how many tokens you can cram in. And so if you want to put, 17 encyclopedias in one query, like you can go do that. And it's like, okay, cool. Like that sounds very Googly. The Google stuff to me just feels like, and I don't know any better way to explain this, but like, I feel like, and maybe this was like before we, Zapruder filmed every single announcement and so on and so forth. But I feel like in the past, they would come out with stuff. It was like Google Maps or Gmail or something. And it was just like, it's just really cool. And all they showed you was like, here's the interesting stuff. And now it feels like they're like, we've gone a decade without coming out with a really big hit. And so everything is like, hey, please love me. And then there's also a certain feeling of like, even in AI, they talk as if they're sort of behind, and I mean, they invented most of this stuff. So it's like the vibe of Google always feels kind of off to me these days. And I don't know how they get it back necessarily. The Microsoft stuff I just felt like was like, okay, cool. Like you're putting AI everywhere. For some weird reason, you're getting back into PCs with Windows again, but okay, cool, I guess. Like I don't really understand why that's happening. Maybe maybe it's for gaming again or something like that. But like, yeah, those two just felt like the big tech companies putting, rubbing AI as like peanut butter over everything they did without anything that like really, really wowed you. Like it was cool, but it sort of felt like the same sort of tone as like when Apple does a big thing now. You're like, okay, cool. So all the stuff is like a little faster and there's newer chips and like, okay, cool. Like I'll probably buy some of that stuff.
Yeah, it's all good.
I don't know. Was there anything that jumped out at you for either one of those?
Well, I think it's not so much anything jumped out as much as sort of like where, just how little we all know about what's really going to happen with AI. And I think what it comes down to, it's like what everyone is looking for. I don't think anyone will say it, but everyone is like, all of these companies are collectively worried in their own way, be like, hey, is there inside of this the next $2 trillion business, right?
Yeah.
And what is it going to look like? And everyone kind of has their own worry. Like if you're Google, you're like, wait a minute, if this disrupts search, we're going to lose $2 trillion. Right. If you're Apple, you're like, man, Siri is bad. If this like thing somehow makes it that you don't need an iPhone, that's going to be our $2 trillion business, right? Microsoft kind of in a similar thing. And so what you're kind of seeing, of course, all these people, like it's a generation that's all read The Innovator's Dilemma. They're not going to let any small technology sneak up on, right? Everyone's doing everything to the point that we're kind of on simultaneously, it's fun, but we're making everything worse. Like Google's like, you know what? Let's just put it on the Google search. And then of course, like there's nothing but memes of like Google saying, put glue on pizza, eat rocks. I mean, the list goes on and on. You're like, this probably wasn't ready to be rolled out to anyone, but they just feel the pressure. And I think what's fun, I think if you're just into technology, is that you go back in time, it's like people forget, like it's just sort of like it took a while for the 10 blue links in Google to reveal itself as this incredible Google, business model, right?
Right.
Facebook, I mean, this predates probably a lot of people listening to this this podcast, but like before the news feed, there was a Facebook wall and you just kind of wrote on it. And then they put in the news feed and people were pissed. But it turns out the news feed was the perfect delivery model for contextual ads, which went on to create $1 billion business. But this was like years. Facebook had been like going on for years. In fact, a lot of people would get in there and be like, what is this wall? What do I even do? So what we're kind of seeing now is like, I think people just are aware of like inside of AI, maybe it's this audio thing we're talking about. Who knows? There could be a business that emerges and maybe it's more a consumer thing that could be a $2 trillion opportunity and everybody wants you to be there. Meanwhile, who do you have on the sideline is you have Jensen Huang from the NVIDIA. He's just out there like, yup, there's going to be $50 trillion businesses. I can't believe you haven't already bought everything you need. You're so far behind, right? He's just, I mean, the ultimate cheerleader, right? I can't believe you didn't, because he's just spewing out stuff like left and right. And I mean, they're selling out GPUs, I don't know, for the next 5 years. So he's just over there, can't come up with enough use cases. So all of these companies, if you will, are sort of in that same kind of like moment of like, am I missing it? What should I do? And they're all kind of rushing to try to integrate it in different ways. And of course, then all of Silicon Valley and all of startups around the world are like, you kind of think of it like every conceivable AI idea is being attempted right now. Like we don't see it all, but like there's a startup for every conceivable, and there's probably one or two that are going to be hugely successful and nobody knows who they are, but everyone is worried they're going to miss it. So, I mean, it's a fun time to be in technology, but it is like, if you're running these, if it was my job to keep the $2 trillion, I'd be up at night. And that's why you do crazy things like, yeah, let's tell people to eat rocks. Fine. Let's deal with Sam Altman. I don't know. He's going to make one of the most successful, popular actresses in the world popular. Angry at us. We'll live with it. You just keep going, right? Who knows what Apple's going to do next month? They're going to be like, who knows? They're going to do something crazy. And it's like, well, what else can you do? Right. I mean, they all feel the pressure. So, and under pressure, people make weird decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think now that I'm thinking about it, and we may have to hold this out for Cloud News of the Month, like August or something. It is going to have a certain feel that you and I will understand. Most people will understand. Like this is going to start to feel like how college football coaches are, right? Like Adam Selipsky, grew the business from whatever 70 billion to 100 billion. That's the equivalent of being like, yeah, every year he was 9-3 and he was fine. He won the games you wanted, but it wasn't good enough. And then he fired him. And then you're like, are they going to find the next Andy Jassy, or is every year, every 3 or 4 years, they're going to fire the AWS CEO because he didn't get them $250 billion fast enough? Or, are we going to be like the next big thing is going to come from some guy or gal who comes up with some crazy, business model / offense that's like, that'll never work over here. And then it's like, oh wait, no, he figured out the spread offense that everyone's like, oh my God, we got to change all of football because of. So
yeah,
I think we have the potential to do an analogy there.
Absolutely, and I think AWS is, to me, in the most interesting kind of unique position in the sense of like their culture, right? Which they will tell you about ad nauseum, about how where do they get their ideas? They talk to customers, they do what the customers want, they have customers, and it's like fantastic, makes total sense, right? Up until the point that the customer doesn't even like know, they have no idea that this other thing even exists. And that's kind of what you're seeing. What, Google has traditionally been this company, right? We kind of make fun of Google, right? Like killed by Google. They're always releasing these weird things, but they hit on some pretty big things like Gmail, Google Search, Google Maps. Like and it's like, well, because they're working on stuff that no one's really asking for. Like nobody even knew to ask for an LLM probably 2 years ago. No one was like on the phone with AWS product managers like, hey, get me an LLM here. And so they're just, so to AWS, it's just like, they're just like, I can't understand. The system isn't working. So to your point, like there is almost like a cultural, if you will, blind spot built in, right? They don't do research just to do research. Whereas Google, to their fault, is sometimes they're doing research, like sending balloons up for the internet and we're all making fun of it. And it's like, well, maybe they hit on something big here. So that's going to be really interesting to do. Now, I will say this, the one thing I want to speak for all of us at the same time is like, I don't think we need any more AI models. Like every one of these conferences, like I think I just watched Microsoft build. They're like, we have everything in Hugging Face plus all these other models. And it's like, I have no idea who has the time to like go look at all these models, evaluate them, for all the developers being asked to like integrate them in. Like, how would you even decide which one of these things you would pick? Like, you're just going to pick the default. Like, you're just going to be like, whatever you give me. So that's the one place where I think everyone wants there to be lots of models to choose from. And like, we can all win and we can all have a different model. I'm just like, no, there's probably going to be like three models because you go to Hugging Face, it just gives me a headache. I want to actually leave Hugging Face and just go talk to OpenAI. That's what I do.
Yeah, no, that's you've been on before. You're definitely on team small number of models. Like you're on team like Uber model. And I do think I think it's going to be a fantastic or fascinating discussion to figure out, is it, do we have a handful? Do we have, one or two, or do we have, hundreds of them? And I think the only thing that will be really interesting, and this is sort of in the news, we can hit on it quickly, but we probably should do it as a follow-up, is like, there's now this, expansion of sort of enterprise-centric models. And I think it's going to be interesting because right now, the best models, at least according to sort of the Hugging Face leaderboard and, the VC funding and all the headlines, they're all in the cloud. And there's not much that you can do to necessarily kind of program them, but by themselves, they do a billion things. Mm-hmm. But if you talk to a lot of companies, they're like, I don't know if I trust that model yet. Or what do I do if I have to have stuff on-prem? And so this is where I think we're going to start to see whether it's IBM and Red Hat announcing stuff, Snowflake announced one, Databricks announced one. I suspect we're going to see a bunch of them. Like, will there be a slew of enterprise-focused models basically around the idea of like lots of your important data lives on-prem, at least for larger organizations, and you don't want that getting out into the GPT-5 model. Yeah, no, I totally agree.
I guess in my mind, there's really like the placeholders are like, okay, obviously there's the OpenAI Microsoft one. So that they're a leader. It seems like they're going to be around. Gemini, Google, they're going to be around for sure. Yep. At the moment, the on-premise open source one, if you made me pick right now, I'd be like, I know everyone hates Facebook or a lot of times, but Llama 2 seems like that's the one that you can download and is just, I think it's, it's getting good reviews, right? It's like much, much smaller, but it still scores very, very high. So whether it's that one, there's going to be one of those, right? Like, I want this enterprise one, and there'll probably be one that runs, on Apple. Like Apple will have one that's super small that runs on their phone. So like, I don't know, some kind of a handful of those I think are going to exist. I think for all the use cases you just went through. I just think it's like all these other people like trying to build another model. Like I'm going to build a better model, and I guess like there could be like another breakthrough. I'm not putting that out, but like using the transformer and training on this data, like if that's all you're doing and you're just doing another model, I feel like that is pretty much played out. Like, you got to bring something new to the game. And I don't know, because I just think, because it's a tyranny of choice kind of thing. I mean, it's hard enough sometimes to pick an instance in AWS. Like, what instance should I run my application on? Just the EC2. If you make me try to pick between hundreds of models to figure out what to use, I'm just like, I'm definitely done.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it'll be fun to watch that.
It's going to be fun to watch. And not to mention that there will be a whole slew of companies that come out who are like, we do model, we do model catalogs, we do model versioning, we do model scanning, there'll be, just like we've had in the past with people being like, I have 17 versions of Java running in my enterprise and I can't keep up with them all and so forth.
That's exactly right.
I think those are the big ones. I think the one other trend that I thought was interesting from this month was, and I saw it at least more than once, but the one that jumped out at me was, we are starting to see some of these folks that are making big bets around. So CoreWeave is the one. So CoreWeave is a GPU cloud. They took $7.5 billion, but they did it in debt financing. So we're starting to see some companies be like, I'm doubling down on this space, but I'm doing it with debt financing. It does have a little bit of a feel like we had in the, kind of fiber glut that happened before the .com burst in 2001. So I'm going to be very interested to sort of watch some of these companies that are now debt financing, their expansions around AI, as to whether or not they, can keep up business models. Because, $7.5 billion, a lot of money. I mean, especially when you're like, well, which GPUs are you going to be able to buy? Because they're not in massive, they're not, highly available. So I'm going to be interested.
I think you have that one. And I think the flip side of that is, we obviously, what can you say? I mean, NVIDIA stock of the year, I don't know, maybe the stock of the last 5 years. I mean, so give them their flowers, but at the same time, it's like, we've seen that, like, we just saw this in the pandemic, right? And I think fiber is a good example back in the 2000s. It's not so much that it was pretty easy to say we're all going to need more bandwidth, but it was hard to predict exactly when we would all need that. So if you bought it in 2001, you overpaid. If you bought it in 2010, you didn't. And so it's kind of back to the Jensen Huang, the fact he's always throwing stuff out. It's like, hey, because we kind of talked about it, people kind of believe there's a $2 trillion opportunity here, but there's also a possibility that it's just we're a long way away. We're 10 years away. What did we get? We all got a great, if you will, editor for to write emails and to check our texts. It's like, okay, I mean, I love that. That's great for me. Use it all the time. But, there's nothing preordained that all of this comes true in the time. And so if you're NVIDIA, it's like, you need that to keep happening. Otherwise, you're going to have that Zoom stock where it's like, oh, remember in 2024 how now we got GPUs just on the side of the road. People are just giving them away, right? Because there's nothing else to do with them. And, that's the fun part. So we'll see what happens, but it's going to be fun to watch.
Well, and the good news about them is even though people are fascinated with whatever the latest GPUs, the H100 or whatever comes after it,
the Blackwell and all
they're
that.
They're not they don't decay. Right. Just like you could have bought the fiber at $1 or you could have bought it at a penny on the dollar, it still did what it does. And there will be plenty of use cases where, a lesser GPU, at, 1/100th the price that it was before will be a really good functional thing for certain stuff. So, it'll be very interesting to not only watch, which companies make these big bets right now, but then if things don't pan out in the same time frame as people expect, who gets to go in and buy them at 1 cent on the dollar?
Well, Justin Wong's come up with something because it wasn't that long ago. First, it was gaming, right? That's why everyone needed it. Well, then it was crypto, right? NVIDIA is such a wild company because, I'll put a link in the show notes. There's been some folks who have done really good historical podcasts. They haven't been geniuses for decades. Gaming was what it was. They thought crypto was a thing. It crashed. And now AI is sort of, I don't want to say fallen in their lap, but I mean, it's not as if, he had this 20-year vision, that AI was going to be a thing. It's it just sort of their stock's not where it is without ChatGPT. 100%. And I will say, I think it fell in the lap because right before that it launched, right? Remember, they wrote down a huge part of their infrastructure to the point that that's maybe Mark Zuckerberg is a great trader. Zuckerberg stepped in and was like, hey, you know what? We'll buy all that stuff since it's on sale and you don't think you need it. And then he clearly either saw it coming or was just good. And then right after that, ChatGPT launches. And so they knew, I mean, even in their own predictions, their own models, they're like, we got to write this down. We got to if you will, figure out what's going on. So things change so fast, right? That's the whole thing. It's in 2 years, it could be bigger than ever, but it's also like we've seen it so many times. It could come back to earth and it could suddenly be like, we were just talking about it. Like it turns out there's some diminishing returns at building a new model. Like the models have gotten as good as they can get. You just can't get them. Applying more math to them just doesn't work. That's possible. Like nobody knows, or it's possible someone opens another door. And then of course, like it's kind of the revenge of the math nerds, mathematicians out there. Maybe, hey, after all this matrix multiplication, who knows? Maybe someone else has got, you know what? This other algorithm works even better. And it does it, you know what? Right. And it's not GPU. It's not matrix multiplication. It's something like that. Poor guys at Intel, they're hoping for something like that. Like you got to get us off this GPU thing. The Intel's just, withering away after all their dominance. You got to think how sad they must be.
That's right. Somewhere there is a Google research group getting ready to release a paper that they will not monetize as much as they should, and the rest of the industry might benefit from it. So we can only hope.
Definitely possible.
We can only hope. Well, listen, man. Thank you as always for being on the show. Thank you for going almost an hour now on the Cloud News of the Month. Best way for folks to catch up with what you're doing on Software Defined Talk, Slack, all the things.
Yeah, definitely. Right now in your podcast player, if you want more podcasts like this, go to search for Software Defined Talk, subscribe right there, or go to softwaredefinedtalk.com and subscribe on the website. We've got all that stuff. We've got a Slack, we've got a newsletter, and we've got a podcast. So come check us out. Love to have you as a listener.
Good stuff. All right, man. Brandon, thank you as always. Thank you for on behalf of Aaron and I and folks, thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. And with that, we'll wrap it up and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.